everyone. Welcome back to Season 2 of the Discovery Pod. I am your host, Eve Richards. What an exciting show we've got today. We've got Stanford Law Professor Richard Thompson Ford. We'll dive into his background in a few minutes. But please, make sure you watch us every Thursday on the Discovery Pod with Eve's YouTube channel, or you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. I am joined today by my co-host, Tony Blass. You saw Tony Blass from Season 1. Tony is an actor. He's a producer. He's done it all. I'm actually doing a movie with Tony that's set in Sweden. So, Tony, welcome back. It's so great to have you back. And you look incredible. Oh, my God.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be back here doing Season 2. And yes, I left 60 pounds or so behind since the last time we saw each other last year. Fantastic.
So what did you do to lose all this weight?
Well, I'm doing what I think a lot of people in Hollywood are doing right now, which is Wegovy. It's kind of like Ozempic, but a little bit stronger. And also following a diet on Weight Watchers and doing walking and exercising, as you suggested last season. So you're very inspiring to me, Eve.
Oh, well, thank you. So glad for you. That's wonderful, very inspirational. Are there any projects that you're working on that we should know about?
Well, yes. I won a contest to go to Seoul, Korea.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
I'm leaving next week.
Okay.
And I'll be performing with singers from around the world.
Wow. Fantastic. So what are you performing?
Well, I'm going to perform Colors of the Wind from Disney's Pocahontas.
I didn't know you could sing. Oh, my goodness. You've got this talent that incredible, Tony.
Well, I think everyone can sing, actually, and I think we should. It brings oxygen to the brain, and it brings peace to the heart.
That's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I think the weight loss journey is incredible. And, this show for me, it's all about trying to inspire folks around the world. So I think your journey, people would see pictures of you from last season and how you look today. I think people would be inspired by your journey. Are you still on that weight loss trajectory?
Oh, yeah. In fact, that's why I'm not going to finalize my wardrobe until I'm all the way there. But at this point, I'm actually thinner than I've been since the 1990s.
Wow, that is fantastic. I mean, very inspiring. I want to do a plug as well because one of my family members, she's not going to like this, but Susan also lost an incredible amount of weight, and I got to give her a lot of kudos. Anyone who's losing weight on the weight loss journey, that's fantastic, Tony. So, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to we're honored to be joined by one of the foremost legal scholars and thinkers of our time, Professor Richard Thompson Ford. Professor Ford is a law professor at Stanford Law School. He's renowned for his insightful work on race, civil rights, and has been a powerful voice in shaping conversations about these issues, both inside and outside the legal community. He's authored several thought-provoking books, including his latest, Dress Codes: How the Laws of Fashion Made History, which has received critical acclaim globally and inspired an Editor's Choice TED Talk in 2021. Today, we'll dive into his journey. Professor Ford, welcome to the Discovery Pod with Eve. It is so good to meet you and to have you with us today.
It's great to be on your show. Oh, I like that. Well, it's great to be on your show. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Of course.
Well, I would think you would be pretty used to the applause, considering how many shows you've done and TED Talks, and you're on. You get around, visiting professor at several Ivy League schools, as well as being at Stanford University, and I believe you have been called the best dressed professor at Stanford. How did you achieve that?
Well, it's funny. I was a long time ago when we had our first, or no, it was actually second child, and you know how that is. You're sleep deprived and everything else. But Esquire magazine had this contest for the best dressed real man, and I thought it would be fun to enter and take a bunch of pictures. Most of the people were fashion models and things like this. So, but to take a bunch of pictures where I'm holding my little baby daughter and wearing a suit or something like that. But anyway, I did not win, but I made it into the top, I think, 6. Because they wanted to focus on real men, not just people who were in Hollywood or fashion. So that was a lot of fun.
That's incredible. Your father was such an influential figure in your life, a tailor, an activist, a scholar. How did growing up with someone who embodied so many roles shape yours?
Well, profoundly. One of the he was a huge influence in many, many ways. His work with the community, he was an ordained Presbyterian minister, so a lot of his activism was inspired by his faith, but also by, of course, his experiences as an African American. He grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, which was during the Jim Crow era, about as bad as it got for race relations. And so he worked very hard in order to ensure that the next generation would not face some of the obstacles that he had faced. And he had a charisma that I've never been able to come close to equaling. He just, kind of lit up a room when he went into it. But another thing that he was influential about was self-presentation or dress. He was a very sharp dresser. He actually trained as a tailor in college.
Wow.
So he knew how clothing was supposed to be put together, and he would examine things. If we went shopping, he would kind of tug at seams and make sure that clothing was properly made. And he rejected a lot of them as just not good enough. But he dressed very well, and experiencing that, I started to see as a young person that wasn't just a matter of vanity. This was important to his ability to do his work. It was important to self-dignity. It was an important way to navigate racial relations at a time when he was often the only African American in the circles in which he moved. And so I saw how important that was.
Wow. As a segue to this, or follow up to that question, because I've watched a lot of your videos online. Tell us a little bit about your mother and her influence in your life as well.
Well, my mother was she was a wonderful and an inspirational mother in so many different ways. She worked as a librarian for a long period of time, so education was always a central focus in our house. And my mother was the one who, helped us with our homework, who inspired us to read, who told us about her favorite novels. She was also very active in the church. Until quite recently, she was a deacon in the church. So once again, the role of their religious faith was very important. She's a wonderful cook, among other things. And, just a solid rock, a source of support for both me and my sister.
Amazing.
So you call yourself a dilettante sartorialist? I don't know if I said that right. I'm not sure I exactly understand what that means, although I can see that you have great style. And I'm just wondering how that style affects your position, how you achieve that great look.
Well, thank you. What I mean by dilettante sartorialist is that they're people who, study fashion or style for a living. That's what they do. Yeah. That's not me. My day job, so to speak, is working on legal issues, but I'm interested in all of the things involving men's style, fashion, and not just men's style, but the way style and fashion affect people's day-to-day lives and their ability to move through the world with pride and self-respect and dignity. And of course, it's just fun. With respect to my own personal style, my father was hugely influential. I went through the phases that a lot of people do when they're young. I had a punk phase. I had a, hip hop phase, where I would dress in a variety of styles that my dad probably didn't love. But that's what you do when you're a young person. But ultimately, I settled on a kind of more of a classic style, which is very much like what my father wore. I could probably, if we weren't different sizes, I could probably borrow some of his wardrobe and it would fit right into what I have. Even though it might have been like 40 years ago. So, a classic clothing that's well made always looks good.
Yeah.
And it looks good when you buy it, and it looks good 10, 15 years later. And so once you begin with that foundation, then the rest is, nuance. The rest is details.
Oh, yeah, totally. So I've read your book, of course, several years ago, and thank you for signing this. So I know the backstory, why you decided to write, dress codes. So for anyone who has not read dress codes, because I know you were one of the top 10 best men in 2009 Esquire's best men list, and you did not make it to the top 5, and you decided to, because of, you said, the questions, you felt like the questions, the way, I don't know, you responded to the questions, and so this was your response to that. Can you tell anyone who hasn't read the book what this is all about?
It's about the importance of clothing and why people wear what they wear. And, with the Esquire contest, it's funny, they asked me, why do you wear what you wear? Explain your personal style. And the truth is, I couldn't do it. I didn't have a good answer. And I think most people, even people who are very stylish, you probably would have a hard time articulating why they choose what they choose to wear. So I started to think it would be really interesting to look historically and try to find out. Now, I'm a lawyer and a law professor, and so my way in was to look at rules and laws around what people wear. So the book is a history of dress codes. It's a history of laws, and back in the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, what people could wear was regulated by law. There were elaborate codes that dictated who could wear what according to your social status, according to your rank, according to your religion, and certainly according to your gender. And I go through history to the present day, looking at laws, rules, political controversies surrounding clothing, and discovered that in every era, clothing has had profound social and political significance. It hasn't just been a matter of individual taste, but it's in a very important way, it's been a mode of social activism, of resistance to hierarchies, of social control.
Wow.
So you mentioned that Mark Zuckerberg, for example.
Yeah.
Well, I related to what he said about he didn't spend time on silly things like fashion and just wears a T-shirt all the time, and how he doesn't care about it. And I remember a time when I used to say that I didn't care about it because I just wanted to wear whatever I wanted to wear, and I favored bright colors or maybe some inappropriate clothes based on the situation I was in. And but when you explained about how choosing not to conform to so-called established norms is in itself a choice, and it can have a strong impact. So I wonder if you could elaborate on that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things I wanted to emphasize in the book and kind of push back on the idea that clothing, fashion is superficial, that it doesn't really matter, that, only shallow people care about it, these kind of ideas. And, these ideas are quite prevalent in the academy where I work. The idea that we live a life of the mind and that we have more weighty and important things to care about than what we're wearing. And often this attitude is conveyed through kind of deliberately nondescript or deliberately slovenly dress. So Mark Zuckerberg's idea with the gray t-shirt, well, I just wear a gray t-shirt. I don't care. I don't want to waste my time on fashion. But what I wanted to point out there is that the fact that he made that statement suggests that he does care about fashion,
Yeah.
and that gray t-shirt now is not a matter of indifference. It's become a statement of a type. And indeed, it's become a symbol of the work ethic. So the full statement that he made was something like, this is not an exact quote, but it was something like, if I wasted my time on superficial and trivial things like what I'm wearing, I wouldn't be doing my job to make Facebook the best company it could be.
Yeah.
And so if you hear that, then, well, what does it mean if somebody does spend time and cares about what they look, or they look fashionable? Well, it suggests they're not doing their job. So that kind of denial of the importance of physical presentation becomes a job requirement. It's not a matter of indifference, and that, I think, is basically a fashion statement.
So since the release of your book, Dress Codes in 2021, have you noticed or any changes in the way your students approach fashion?
Oh, and the way my students approach it? Probably not. I mean, occasionally a student will say, like, "Oh, I had to think about what I was wearing because you're here and you've written this book, or what does my clothing say about me?" But the truth is, students are, and I think quite appropriately, they wear whatever they want. I think that's great, and it's a real range, honestly. You'll have students who are in class wearing what you might think of as kind of pre-professional clothing. They're somewhat dressed up. Most of our students are really relaxed. It's California. It's hot outside, and they're wearing shorts and t-shirts.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Victorian styles that you were showing, and I thinking about how uncomfortable they must have been on a day-to-day
Yes.
basis, and also why they needed a staff, the upper classes, to get dressed, because there's so much involved. But it seems like men's styles have relaxed over the years, and there's a little more feeling of comfort. And then I realized that something like the Spanx, or like Kim Kardashian's Skims line, it's almost like a return to something like a corset. And I wonder if women are encouraged or kind of almost forced to wear more uncomfortable clothing for whatever reason, with having stronger demands on their figure, their shape, and so forth.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, one of the most consistent themes throughout history that I write about in the book is the way women are subject to much stricter and more cumbersome norms in terms of clothing than men. Now, in earlier periods in history, this was enforced by law. A woman, for instance, wearing pants until the early 20th century might be subject to arrest for public indecency.
Wow.
And here we're just talking about pants, regular old pants, not tight pants, not see-through, nothing like that. But just the idea of a woman wearing trousers was seen as indecent. It was seen as a signal that woman wanted to claim the prerogatives of men, which would include men's sexual prerogatives. And so women dressed in that, it was a fetish. So actually, sex workers would dress in men's fashion, and this was true since the late Middle Ages forward, as a sexual provocation. But then that got turned into, so you can see how strictly these gender lines were policed. Now, then when you talk about corsets, binding clothing that's cumbersome, difficult to walk in, that's been another really common theme where women's I guess the best way to put it is that men's clothing became modern very early on. So by the mid 1700s, men's clothing was rapidly modernizing. It was becoming streamlined. It was becoming practical. It was easier to put on and take off. It got cheaper so that a lot of men's clothing could be mass produced early on. By the early 1800s, you've got the mass produced kind of Brooks Brothers style suit for men, not for women. Women's clothing, continues to be hard to wear, cumbersome, requires the staff to put on lots and lots of rules about what's appropriate wear.
Yeah.
And even when women's clothing started to get a little more subdued, the things like corsets continued. So you moved from a corset that cinched in the waist in order to create an hourglass figure to, in the 1920s, when the flapper style came in, then you had like a new kind of corset that was designed to pinch everything in so that you would look thin and athletic.
Gosh. So tell our viewers, you've achieved so much, and there are so many people out there who our listeners and viewers who would want to know, what advice can you give someone who is interested in a similar path, but they're not on, they don't know how to navigate getting started?
Yes, well, lots of thoughts about that. It depends on whether the person is interested in a legal career. And there's one set of things one has to do in order to pursue that career. That involves, doing well in college, and passing standardized tests and this kind of thing. So you have to pass the LSAT, which is a test that determines whether you can get into law school and which law school you can get into. And then eventually you'll have to pass the bar. So there are a lot of like formal requirements there. Then now with respect to that, my one piece of advice would be for people to follow their passions in college. A lot of people think there's some kind of fixed pre-law curriculum that you have to take. That's not true. The most important thing is to do well at whatever you're doing in college. And my personal experience, but also my experience in observing students, has been people do well at things that they love, that they're passionate about. So you pursue your passion, the rest follows, because you will be good at it. And there are no real prerequisites for law school, unlike other careers. If you want to be a doctor, there are clearly prerequisites. But if you want to be a lawyer, you can study pretty much whatever you want. I guess in terms of writing, there are two things that I think are indispensable to becoming a writer. One is to read, and that's the first and most important one. Read a lot of different types of things. Try to get the sound and the cadence of good writers in your head, and then the next one is to write, of course.
Wow.
So you write a lot and be prepared for the fact that most of what you write will never see the light of day. I think that's true for any writer.
Yeah.
Most of what you write winds up on the floor in the trash can. That's not a failure. That's what's necessary in order to get the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, and so a lot of people feel like, I spent all this time writing something, and now the editor cut that whole section. The editor cut the section to make your book better. That's good. And the fact that no one's going to ever read that, well, that's okay.
Good advice. So besides your mom and dad, who are mentors, who are some of your mentors as well?
Oh, I've had so many important mentors. Professors, teachers. I could go all the way back to elementary school, when I had a wonderful teacher named Mr. Funk in 6th grade. And he was so inspiring because he could see in every student their potential. He could see their passions. And so when he talked to you, he would understand, this is what makes this person tick. This is what makes them a great student. He had faith in everyone, and he believed in everyone. And I'm still in touch with him.
Wow.
So he cares about all of the students, and he loves to see where they wind up. Going through college, I had inspiring professors who taught me how to see the world in a different way.
Wow.
I guess that's the easiest way to put it. They introduced ideas and ways of thinking about the world that had never occurred to me before, and convinced me that I wanted to pursue a life of the mind. when I was in law school, there were a couple professors in particular who really believed in me, even though I was kind of, I wasn't the typical Harvard Law School student, I'll put it that way. And a lot of people wouldn't have been able to see that I had the potential to, for instance, be a law professor, but a couple of professors there did, and spent a lot of time with me.
Amazing.
And with my work and kind of nurturing my scholarly creativity. And so I've had so many mentors that have been inspiring in different ways.
That's great.
So I wanted to talk about something you said last year about the Supreme Court, because I'm going to have to admit I know next to nothing about it. I'm just completely flying blind here. But I thought it was an interesting point that they were actually considering the whole future foundation of affirmative action.
Yeah.
And that they expected a ruling that imposes color blindness as a constitutional mandate. So first of all, I'd like to know what's happened since last summer, but secondly, summer of 2023, but also how you think their ruling will be and what its impact would be.
Oh, sure. Let's see where to start. So, in a case called Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College, and there was a companion case that involved the University of North Carolina, but the same plaintiffs sued universities in order to challenge their affirmative action policies. And those plaintiffs were successful. So the Supreme Court issued an opinion. I'm hesitating here because the details of the opinion are quite complicated. And there's a risk of oversimplifying this. What many people say is they issued an opinion that required color blindness. And that's true as a shorthand, but it's a lot more complicated than that in practice. What they essentially said was that the universities can't consider race in and of itself as a factor in their admissions. But they did allow the universities to continue to consider race as part of an individual's application and life story. So now you might think right away, wow, that's a distinction only a lawyer could make. Like, what's the difference between considering race in general and considering race as an individual? We're all individuals. I think what they're getting at was a university is entitled to consider, for instance, whether an applicant overcame adversity or whether an applicant came from a unique community that has influenced their worldview. And that adversity could be racial adversity. And that community that inspires a different worldview could be a community based on race. And so the university can consider race in that respect, but it can't just say we want more black students or we want more students of a particular race in order to balance our student body. Now, what's happened since? What's happened since is there's been a lot of confusion because on the one hand, the universities have been told you can't consider race any longer. You can't consider race in order to promote, for instance, a diverse class. You have to look at each individual applicant. But you can think about race in the context of their own personal story. Universities aren't really sure exactly how to interpret this, and I think that they've interpreted it in a lot of different ways. The consequence of that decision has been that, for the most part, the number of Black and Latinx applicants to or admitted students to selective universities has decreased quite profoundly.
Yep.
In some cases, it's been as far as you might have a student body that was 14% Black, and then after the opinion, it's 5%. So very large decreases. Now, though it's not true across the board, there's some universities where there hasn't been much of a decrease.
Yeah.
So we're in kind of an uncertain period right now. But, at my own university, Stanford University, just released its statistics, and there was a quite substantial decrease in the number of Black and Latino students that were admitted in this class after the Supreme Court's affirmative action decision.
Wow. So how do you see the Civil Rights Act of 1964 shaping modern day society today?
Wow. Oh, that's a big question. Well, I mean, in many ways, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has been, I think, perhaps the most profound piece of legislation ever passed by the United States Congress, at least one of the most. Mm-hmm. And in many ways, the immediate effect was to undercut the last vestiges of the formal Jim Crow system. So in the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, in a lot of the American South in particular, there were explicit racial barriers in places of public accommodations, lunch counters, in education, and in employment.
Yeah.
Now, all of those barriers were removed by the Civil Rights Act, including education. Now, a lot of people would say, well, wait, Brown versus Board of Education was decided in 1954. That's what got rid of segregation in schools. But the truth is, the Southern states resisted that, and they resisted it successfully until the Civil Rights Act. So, huge effect there. And the difference between, I was born in 1966. My parents very much remember the Jim Crow system and lived through it. And the difference between that and the 1970s when I was growing up was huge.
Yeah.
Now, not for everybody. It was most important for the African Americans who were well positioned to take advantage of the new opportunities. Mm-hmm. So it's important to say, people who were very poor, people who lived in, segregated and troubled urban neighborhoods may not have benefited much.
Wow.
And so we still have lots of racial inequalities in our society, but it was a huge effect.
Yeah.
And I think it also changed attitudes so that people began to, and over time have seen that racial discrimination is immoral, that it's wrong. And back in the 1960s, a lot of people didn't think it was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the Supreme Court. I grew up in the 70s also, and color blindness was considered an ideal. But I think what I'm hearing you say is that when it comes to at least the law and in the education system and so forth, that it's not enough or even possibly detrimental?
Yes, I'm glad you asked that follow-up question because, that's key to the affirmative action decisions. Yes, and if color blindness is an ideal, and I think most people would agree that in the ideal world, the world to which we all aspire, people wouldn't care about race and color.
Yep.
It would just be a matter of indifference, like hair color. I think almost everyone wants that world, at least with respect to things like employment. Yes. And, now maybe that we have got, a Black community and we care about that and have racial pride. That's great. But when we're talking about things like employment and opportunities, we want that world.
Yes.
But the question is, how do we get there?
That's a good point.
That's the problem. Because to say, well, we're just going to not talk about race now, we're colorblind. Yeah. When we're dealing with the legacy of Jim Crow segregation, we're dealing with generations of racial injustice, the theft of labor, exclusion from opportunities, exclusion from neighborhoods where there are, healthy environments for people to live and grow up in. All of that. You can't just say, well, we're going to forget about that and, restart now. Because if you do that, you're locking in the detrimental effects of all of that history.
Yes.
That history needs to be taken on board. And so something like an affirmative action policy, I don't think anyone thinks that in an ideal world, we need to do that. But we don't live in an ideal world. And in order to figure out how you're going to have a university environment that's racially inclusive, where people can come together in an integrated environment and learn from each other across racial barriers. Right now, we need to consider race.
Yeah. So going back to your book, Dress Codes, and knowing what we've gone through with, COVID and how it shifted the way people dress because a lot of folks had to pivot and work from home. If you had to end the book today, would the ending be slightly different?
Yeah, I would probably add quite a bit about COVID and post-COVID. It's interesting that, yeah, you're right. The book came out in the middle of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And work from home meant that the kind of clothing that you wear on the couch with your laptop on your lap became work clothing, and so I remember when work from home first started and everyone's on Zoom and you would say, well, what do I wear? It's a work meeting. Yeah. And for work, I put on a jacket but everyone knows I'm not in the office. We're all at home.
Yeah.
And the kitchen is in the background, dirty dishes, kids running. So it feels a little silly. So people started to dress down. And I think that's kind of carried over into making the workplace even more casual than it was before.
Well, after all this heavy talk, I think I need a drink. So you are an off-hours mixologist, I believe. So
oh, yes. That's another one of my hobbies.
Wow.
Nice.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. That's incredible.
That'd come in handy. So what are some of your favorite recipes and specifically for what occasions?
Okay. So, my favorite go-to cocktail is a martini. It's a gin martini.
Nice.
It should be stirred. It should be very, very cold. And that's something that I could do blindfolded now because I made so many of them. So it's a standard kind of go-to before dinner, after work cocktail. I also love a cocktail called the Negroni, which is it's a mix of gin and red vermouth and Campari. That's just a great, delicious cocktail. And again, pretty easy to make. Martinis, I think, are kind of hard to make, actually. There are only 2 ingredients, but everything's down to details.
Amazing.
And, then you can get into all kinds of really interesting stuff. There's a cocktail called The Last Word, which uses chartreuse and lime juice and maraschino. It's delicious. I could go on.
Professor Ford, we are at the 2-minute mark. So the last question that we usually ask is, if you were to have dinner with 3 people alive or dead, who would it be and why?
Oh, wow. 3 people alive or dead.
Or alive. Who would it be and why?
Oh, okay. That's tough. I'm going to say James Baldwin, William Shakespeare.
Good one.
And
that's a good one.
And Queen Elizabeth.
Wow. Incredible. Professor Ford, it's been an absolute privilege to have you with us today. Your insights into law, race, fashion, and society are not only thought-provoking, but truly inspiring. Our listeners would be honored to listen to this. So, do you have anything new that you're working on that you would like our viewers to know about? Any new books? Anything that,
I am just starting a new book project. It's in its very early stages.
Wow.
So it'll be a few years till it's out. It's going to be called The Virtues of Vice.
Wow.
And essentially, the theme is about the way we have defined certain things as vices as societies, but it's been part of a mechanism of social control. And so people engaged in some things described as vices are actually doing social activist work.
Incredible.
Early stages.
Awesome. And so you are on Instagram and...
Yes. Yeah, I'm on Instagram. It's going to be Professor of Style, all one word, all lowercase.
And people can purchase your book on Amazon.com.
Yes, absolutely. Amazon or bookshop.org.
Okay.
It supports local booksellers. It's on all the online places.
Thank you again for sharing your wisdom. It's been truly an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Thanks again, and have a great rest of the day.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Tony, this has been such an incredible show to have him with us today. I've learned so much about race and fashion. As you know, I love fashion. So just getting his viewpoints has been incredible. What did you get out of this?
Well, I learned finally, I think I understand about the ideals and the practice of colorblindness, and that was really, you're a wonderful teacher, and I appreciate that.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, please watch this episode on the Discovery Pod with Eve's YouTube channel, or you can listen to us on iHeartRadio, Spotify, Amazon, or your favorite podcast platform. Again, listen to us every Thursday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And Professor Ford, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been truly an honor. Roger Neal, thank you so much for all the hard work that he's been doing to get all of those guests and shows coordinated and booked. So thank you, Roger. Thank you, Tony Sweet and the team. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see you next Thursday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Again, thank you and have a great rest of the week, everybody.